Let us begin. I'd like to acknowledge that our original landholders, the Arapaho tribe, teach us the wisdom of being in place. I thank them for their ongoing lessons in sustainable life in our high desert and reminding us that it takes a village. This virtual town hall would not be possible without the support of our host, Empower Our Future, and its stalwart advocacy of local power. We may not always agree on issues, but we will always agree to be civil. We support an energetic village commons, also known as the Empower Hour. Empower Our Future volunteers Steve Whitaker, Julie Sonneiser, Paul Coleman, and Leslie Glistrom are monitoring the mute buttons and tracking the questions requests coming in chat. This town hall owes everything to the efforts of Nina Krisman, Cooper Baum, Robin Noble. These legislative aides really brought this idea to life. We thank the tireless legislators themselves who have so graciously made time available to you after a long legislative planning day. And most of all, we thank you for taking time at the end of a long Zoom day to join us. Tonight, we have an hour of our legislators' evenings. Foremost, we are interested in hearing their outlooks for the current session of the General Assembly. In the time remaining, we will do our best to share your questions and concerns to them. We will use the chat to field your feedback. If you have a question to pose, please tag it with question, so our chat monitors can tell the questions from the commentary. Also, our two chat monitors will prioritize the questions asked by many people and combine related questions into one. Finally, your legislators are eager to hear your voices, and with the limited time, we have made a simple online form available should you not be heard this evening. We will place the link to the online form presently. And with that, we will introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Judy Amabel, who recently was elected to represent House District 13, which is the seat previously held by Speaker Casey Becker, who was term limited. House District 13 includes the western part of Boulder County, as well as Clear Creek, Gilpin, Grand, and Jackson County. Representative Amabile is a lifelong Democrat who has lived in Colorado for almost 50 years. She is a mother of 3 adult sons. For 25 years, she served as the founder and business owner of Polar Bottle, a maker of sport water bottles. As a legislator, she is working to fight climate change, bring greater economic justice to all Coloradans, and increase access to mental health resources in our state. Judy?
Hi, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you guys for putting this thing together, and thank you to Robin and the other aides who helped out with that, and to Leslie, of course, for everything she does. So I think I'm supposed to talk about what bills I'm working on. And I want to just talk about one because I think it's the most important bill that I'm working on in this space. And what the bill is about: rural electric co-ops. Colorado has 22 rural electric co-ops. These co-ops serve something like 30% of the consumers in Colorado. And right now they have sort of a patchwork of how they elect their boards. There's a lot of sort of cloak and dagger stuff. There's not a lot of transparency, and there's not necessarily good governance. So the bill adds transparency. It imposes some good governance on the co-ops, and it also applies to Tri-State, the co-op of which many of them are members. And it makes sure that they disclose compensation, but mostly it makes it easier for new people to get elected to the board. And the reason that it matters is because these boards are deciding who is the president, who is the CEO of our co-op, what mix of electricity are we buying? How many renewables? Are we going to support legislation at the state that allows more solar? How are we going to operate in the world as a co-op? And no other state has the kind of legislation that we're proposing, but they are all now looking to us so that they can do something similar in states all around the country that have co-ops. So it matters because right now we're all on the outside looking in, trying to pressure companies like Excel and Tri-State and others to change what they're doing. But these co-ops will be on the inside, and that is a better place to be if you want to really make a difference in the mix of fuels that you're buying for your electricity. And so that's I think the most consequential bill that I'm working on this session, and we've been stakeholding fast and furiously, and I think we have the bill in a pretty good place. We're about ready to finalize it, and anybody who wants to help get behind the bill, I would love your help as to come down to the Capitol and testify or write a letter in support, or if any of you live or are serviced by a rural electric co-op, to write to your co-op board and tell them you would like them to support this bill. So thank you.
Okay, and next up we have Steve Fenberg with Edie on deck. Steve Fenberg was elected to the Colorado Senate in 2016 and has served as a Senate Majority Leader since 2018. Majority Leader Fenberg prioritizes increasing voting access, bold solutions to the climate crisis, and structural reforms to advance economic and social justice. In 2019, he sponsored and passed the largest overhaul of oil and gas regulations in Colorado in over 60 years, and he continues to be a champion of climate and energy legislation. He also just got a recent important promotion to father. Steve?
Thank you, David, and good to see all of you. Thanks for putting this together. Awesome crowd, almost 200 people now, so appreciate it. You know, we have obviously done a lot as a state when it comes to climate and energy issues just in the last couple of years. But we all know it's nowhere near what we need to be doing to solve the massive crisis that's in front of us right now. So, you know, that is to say, we should take a brief moment to remember what we have already accomplished and use that as inspiration to keep on going to make sure we don't stop there and we don't get satisfied with the work that we have done, because there's so much more to do. You know, I will just say real quick, obviously we are living in a time where we have it seems like we have a crisis on top of a crisis. You know, if you're in front of your TV at all today, you were watching the impeachment trial of our most recent president, while we have this climate crisis going on in the background, while we also have a global pandemic that has quickly resulted into an economic crisis. So there's a lot that elected officials and leaders and community leaders have on their minds and on their to-do list in the near future. And what I would say is, you know, in some ways, I think some people would look at that and say, okay, climate and environmental stuff and things like that can be on the back burner because we have all these other issues that are facing us that are so urgent. And what I would say is I think that is tempting for some people to think that way. But in a lot of ways, I think the crises that are in front of us actually give us a massive opportunity to rethink and reimagine what we want our society to look like and what we want to value and what equity truly looks like in our economic system and all of that. And so clearly our number one priority in the very short term, this legislative session, which starts Tuesday, we actually already started a month ago, but our grand opening is Tuesday. We took a month off because of the virus. Our number one priority is going to be getting Colorado in a place where we can address the immediate health crisis that's in front of us. And it's obviously turned into an economic crisis, and we need to address that. And those are going to be big priorities for us right out of the gate come Tuesday. But the way I think about it is we need to stop the bleeding. We need to stop the crisis that's in front of us. We need to get people in our society back to where we were pre-pandemic. But probably most importantly, we need to think about how we're building our future so that we can be more resilient and more equitable for the next pandemic and for the current crises that are already facing us, like climate. And that's where I think it's really exciting. And there's a lot we can do on energy and climate. And so, a couple of the bills that I'm going to be working on, just to name a few, and then we can get into more details. One that I'm excited about is building electrification. So essentially tackling that part of our economy that we haven't made tons of progress on yet when it comes to how we heat our homes and our water, which are largely reliant right now on natural gas. And providing incentives essentially to ensure buildings, whether it's residential or commercial, are switching from natural gas as much as possible over to electric, things like high efficiency heat pumps and things like that. Another aspect that has been one of those hard to make much progress on the climate front is transportation. And we're very hopeful that we're going to have a large transportation deal come out of this legislative session. And we all know the transportation sector is something that pollutes and is very much a big part of our climate problem. And so we're going to prioritize and focus on multimodal transit investments as well as electrification, knowing that the future of transportation in just hopefully a few short years is going to look very different than the one a few short years ago. And we need to electrify and get ready for that transition very fast. We're going to hopefully make some down payments on the just transition work that we want to do as a state for communities and for workers that are historically reliant on fossil fuel production, and make sure we're doing right by them. We are absolutely going to focus on wildfire mitigation. Unfortunately, we also have to focus on wildfire response, and that will look like literally purchasing helicopters and things like that. But we need to think about long-term mitigation, forest health, et cetera, to blunt the impacts of the future. I'm going to be working on a bill around the 120% cap that I think folks are familiar with, but essentially the relatively arbitrary cap on rooftop solar right now. And that was part of the negotiations between Excel and the city of Boulder. So I want to make sure we are getting that done and doing it in a way that moves the ball forward in a significant and hopefully pretty fast way for encouraging more solar. And then there's also going to be some other big picture reforms that we'll focus on. I'm going to probably have a bill with Senator Chris Hansen around PUC reform, something we've been looking at in the past. And we actually made some big strides in the last couple of years, like adding the cost of carbon into calculations for future resource plans and distribution system planning and things like that. We took care of that a few years ago. There's a few other things we still want to do, especially on the side of transmission, kind of one of the missing pieces to getting a lot more renewables online fast, especially in areas that are traditionally underrepresented and don't have a lot of economic opportunities. So that will be in the form of, Chris has a bill around RTOs, and then we also have a separate bill around some structural reforms in the PUC world, which most of the time when I talk about that, people fall asleep in front of me, but I know this crowd is nerdy enough to be excited about the letters PUC. So we'll be talking more about that in the future as well. But there's just a handful of the things. We're also going to be working on environmental justice and ensuring that we are providing, we're thinking with an equity lens when we do all of our investments in renewables. If we're going to be investing in electric buses, I think we should focus on underrepresented communities that are more reliant on transit and have a historically disproportionate impact from air quality issues, for instance. So equity is going to be part of the narrative and part of the objective in pretty much everything we take on in the energy front this session. I'll leave it there, and looking forward to chatting more and having more answering some of your questions.
Okay, we're going to move on to Representative Edie Hooton serves as the state representative for Colorado House District 10, representing Boulder, constituents east of Broadway, south of Baseline and into Gun Barrel. In her 5th year representing Colorado House District 10, Representative Hooton serves as the chair of the Capital Development Committee, vice chair of the House Energy and Environment Committee, and is also a member of the House Transportation and Local Government Committee. Representative Hooton's legislative priorities include taking bold action against climate change, preventing youth homelessness, increasing transparency in our healthcare system, and ensuring that housing is a human right for all. I have run into Edie at many weekend programs. She stays late and she explains, of course, these are my Edie?
Thank you, David, for that generous introduction, and for everyone on the call, and of course to Leslie and Empower Our Future for hosting this event. And just true to form, Boulder hugely participates on issues around environment and energy. And I will tell you, energy is rising in Colorado and at the legislature. And so I think finally we're out from the fringes, trying to have our voices heard, to being the epicenter and being considered the leaders, and everyone's looking to us for answers to this incredibly dire climate emergency that we are facing.
While we're waiting for Representative Hooton to come back, I think I'm going to jump in and ask Senator Fenberg if he'd be willing to talk a little bit more. Maybe he can't yet because it's not settled, but a lot of people in Boulder are really interested in the 120%, what we often refer to as the 120% bill. And just to use our time, hopefully constructively, I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about what that is and how you're thinking about it, just to kind of, while we're getting Representative Hooton back in order here.
Sure.
Thank you.
So yeah, for folks who aren't as up to speed on this issue, basically right now, state law, and this has been on the books for a while, it's not necessarily a utility requirement. I mean, the utilities were part of the conversation that put this into the law, but it's enshrined in law, so they don't really have much of a choice right now. And what it is that basically, if you want to interconnect a net metered rooftop solar system, like on your home, you can only install enough panels, a big enough system that is 120% of your previous year's average annual usage. So essentially, they don't want you installing a solar system on your roof that produces much more energy than what you would use. So they give you a 20% buffer. There is a process down the road that if you increase your electricity usage, you can increase it. You could add panels. You can get a bit of a waiver, I think, if you're purchasing an electric vehicle and things like that. But generally speaking, you're limited to 120%. This bill is still being worked on and stakeholdered, and we're talking to utilities and advocates and others. But essentially, it would lift that limit. So it would either lift it or entirely, or it would raise it quite a bit. And the idea is it's a little silly in this day and age when we're trying to get more renewables and meet these very aggressive climate goals, to say if you have a big roof and you could put more solar on it, we're not going to allow you by the force of law to do so. We probably should be saying, if you've got roof space and you're willing to do it and you're going to be part of the solution, we should figure out a way for that to make sense for you as a consumer to put more rooftop solar on your house. So the big question really is going to be, are there going to be other limits, right? So if you can install a larger system on your roof, the utilities, frankly, are going to want to limit how much they have to pay you for that energy you're producing, because they're in the business of selling you energy. They don't really want you providing more energy that they have to buy from you. That's kind of the reverse of how it's supposed to work for them. So they are going to push and say that they want to limit how much they have to purchase or how much the consumer is allowed to roll over from month to month on their bill, and things like that. And that's the crux of it. That's where the debate is in the conversation. We want to make sure we're doing this in a way that results in more solar, more solar being used to sort of power people's homes locally, so we don't have to burn coal in a coal plant miles and miles away and send it over transmission lines and lose some of the energy and all of that kind of thing. If we can produce more energy on our rooftop that we use and our neighbors would use it if it's excess, we think that's much better for the environment as well as for the consumer, actually. So it's going to be a give and take, and I think we'll get somewhere cool and interesting with it that will result in more solar. Hopefully does it in a way that doesn't negatively impact current net metering laws, because that's a touchy subject for folks. And it's exciting to go down this path and have the conversation of what the future could look like with more solar and more distributed generation out there, because that's when you open the door much more interested in things like demand response and using your electric vehicle to be a battery backup for your home or for the grid. And we can get into more interesting things like that when you open up the door to more generation and break down some of these barriers. I think Edie's back as Cooper, but we'll let it slide. Cooper looks different today. And we'll pass it back over to Edie.
I know. I don't know how this works. Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you. I got a lot of personal messages in the chat about what I should do, and including my husband texting me like mad. So, and thank you, honey, for being on the call. So I was thanking everyone, and I thank you very much. And I'm really glad to be here. I think I did just say that energy is rising as an issue with the Capitol, and that's a very good thing. I am bringing back my community choice energy study bill, and I think most of you on the call are familiar with it, but I will give you a brief recap. So what this would do, the bill would open up a PUC docket or docket at the PUC to investigate how community choice aggregation might work in Colorado. Now, I refer to it as community choice energy because I believe that is more intuitive, but it's exactly the same thing as community choice aggregation. And what this would provide is an opportunity for communities that are served by investor-owned utilities to procure their own electricity. And for those communities in Colorado, whether they are seeking lower rates or 100% renewable electricity, options for both. It's a market-based approach. And so that is what we seek to explore. The utility continues to own its infrastructure, the billing, the customer service, the demand side management, that all stays with the utility. This is not a competitive relationship, it is a cooperative relationship. The timeline, so the bill was introduced last year. It passed out of the Energy and Environment Committee, and then it landed in the Appropriations Committee, and then COVID hit, and like many other bills, had to be withdrawn to make way for COVID emergency relief legislation. So I have brought it back this year, and new and improved. We've got an improved fiscal note, which is always a consideration, and certainly in these challenging budget times, even more so. So it's a favorable fiscal note, and actually Steve can speak to this. He's running a bill that will improve the funding for PUC investigations and where those resources are drawn from. Anyway, since last session and going into this session, this is my first bill, and I've got considerable support. We've got Boulder City and Council, the City Council and our county commissioners, Lafayette, Golden, Pueblo, San Miguel County, the City of Denver, Denver City Council have all unanimously passed resolutions in favor of the study bill. And there are 21 well-considered questions that the PUC would look at. And it is a very, for any of you who are familiar with the Public Utilities Commission, it's a very transparent process. So everyone who has a stake or an interest has the opportunity to weigh in. If the bill passes this session, then it would go into the PUC docket. That would be a 7 or 8, 9 month process. They would provide a report to the legislature, to the chairs of the energy committees in both chambers. And if we thought the findings of the report were favorable, then I would introduce enabling legislation. If I was successful in doing that, that would pass, and we're talking now 2023. And then it goes into the rulemaking process. And after the rulemaking process is complete, we're now in 2024, late 2024. And so 2025 would probably be the first year that communities like Boulder or Pueblo or Denver, Golden could seriously consider pursuing a community choice energy model for their own communities. And this dovetails quite nicely with Xcel Energy's goals for that were, mandated by 1426, and with Xcel's and Boulder's franchise agreement. So our first off-ramp in our franchise agreement would be 2025. And so this is a very interesting confluence of timing on the ultimate, if it came to that, consideration by Boulder for adopting a community choice energy model for Xcel meeting its commitments, its obligation, or not obligations, because they're not obligated, they're just committing to it, they've agreed to it. In 2025, it does put some pressure on the whole process, and I think that's quite valuable. And it also raises awareness that communities served by investor-owned utilities have options, or possibly could have options. So we've got a lot of support. The Governor Polis supports the bill. We've got some very active, the Colorado Municipal League, whose mission is to advocate for local control, is taking leadership on this bill. They very much support it, as does the Sierra Club, and Sierra Club has been a great partner from the very beginning on the bill. And we've got the Communities for Climate Action are supporting. We've got some very great partners and a lot of momentum. But as you can imagine, we do have some resistance. So, and therein lies the rub, how we get everyone on board to support a study bill. This is not enabling legislation, but, it threatens, some interest. And so it's my first bill, and will be my biggest lift this session. And I thank everyone on this call who is interested in supporting me in my effort. And I know that Empower Our Future has been taking a leadership role, and I appreciate that very much, and happy to answer anyone.
Woo, okay. So we're going to head into question and answer. The way we're going to handle this is we've had two of our volunteers monitoring the chat. We're going to go with Julie Zanheiser first. Go ahead and unmute and unvideo her, and yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate the three of you taking this kind of time, and your introductions, although they were not as lengthy as you or we would like, gave us a good start. This is a question that came in from, it's a combination question from a couple of different people on a topic that really wasn't mentioned, and that relates to some of last year's legislation and some hopes for going forward. It relates to last year's House Bill 1261, which directed Excel to be 80%, to have 80% carbon reduction. I believe this is what the questioner is saying, by 2030. But they feel there are two questions about that. One, does the Air Quality Board have an impact on whether they will achieve that goal? And are there firm rules? And what if Excel doesn't achieve this goal? And is there a cost for noncompliance? And then thirdly, some individuals feel that that's not fast enough, and what can we do about that?
So I'll jump in to start. We could probably talk about this topic for the rest of the night and then some. But 1261 was a big accomplishment for Colorado. It did actually set those climate and those emission reduction goals, not just for Excel, but for the entire state. So that technically applies to transportation sector. It applies to the utilities. It applies to oil and gas. It applies to the entire economy of Colorado in a lot of ways. So that's why it's so great. That's also why it's so incredibly difficult to implement because it's not just one specific sector. There were other bills, especially that year, like Senate Bill 236, which was my bill, that actually includes some of the more specifics related to Excel and for utilities. And both of those bills really kind of live together to accomplish those goals. The interesting thing about the AQCC, so that's the Air Quality Control Commission. There's a lot of acronyms in this world. They are largely the entity that is implementing 1261. But it is, but Excel, generally speaking, their regulator is the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission. So right there, that what I just said, it sort of illustrates some of the complexities here, right? The implementer of 1261 is the AQCC, but Excel, which is the largest utility, one of the largest emitters of emissions, is regulated at the PUC, and that's why you got to sort of look at 1261 and Senate Bill 236 together to understand how to implement some of this stuff. Do I think we're moving fast enough? No, I don't. I think Judy and Edie would agree that that's not necessarily to point fingers or to blame anyone. That's to say that no matter how fast we are acting, it will probably never be fast enough in my mind, because we needed to have acted more aggressively decades ago. But I think we got a slow start in meeting some of these goals. I actually think it's going to accelerate, and we're going to hit. We're going to start doing things that are going to make significant bites at the apple these next couple of years. I think tackling the transportation system and electrifying as much as we possibly can when it comes to transportation is going to be is going to have a huge impact. Excel is just about to file their electric resource plan, and that is going to tell us a lot more about where they think they are headed and where they're capable of going in the next several years. Colorado Springs is shutting down their coal plant. So things are happening. They're happening pretty fast. I think we, as advocates, need to be ready. I know we've all been waiting for this transition for a generation now, but we need to be ready to make sure it happens correctly. It happens in a way that is good for the consumer, not just the climate, and also good for workers and keeps communities in mind when these coal plants and when these fossil fuel economies really do transition. So there's a lot we still need to do. The roadmap, the greenhouse gas roadmap that the governor put out recently is great. It's not enough. I think we all agree, but it is at least a roadmap, right? It is the major stepping stones that we have to take and we all have to push ourselves, as well as the governor, as well as the utilities and all the other people and entities in this conversation, to move faster than even what the law requires them.
Thank you, thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
Okay, we'll now go to Steve Whitaker for the next round. Julie, you're
Yes,
on deck.
we have a question yet again for Steve Fenberg. The question being, will the building electrification bill include bans or disincentives for new natural gas infrastructure, which will have a 50+ amortization period?
You know, I'll be, I'm not going to be the typical politician, and I'm going to be really direct on this one. Probably not. It's probably not going to have an outright ban on installing natural gas to homes for a few reasons. One of which is that I'm not sure that the bill would pass if that was in it. And if this is really about transitioning folks' home heating over to electricity and heat pumps and electric water heaters, et cetera, as fast as possible, I want to make sure the bill passes, first of all. And then secondly, this is going to be really about moving the market as fast as we can. And obviously an outright ban on new construction would move that part of the market pretty quick. But I think it's probably it's faster to get this done by thinking about all of the buildings that have already been built, which is the problem right now, right? Rather than having to fight about future builds when we aren't even doing enough right now to retrofit homes. So is this something that I would support? Yes. Something that we need to do? Yes. I think there's also an issue where, you know, the 188 of us on this call would say, yeah, hell yeah, get rid of the natural gas that's going to every home and building. A lot of people still like cooking on their natural gas stove. And we need, you know, we don't want to pick a fight with the average homeowner when this bill really is a bill that's going to help the average homeowner, and we don't want to confuse that message. So there's a further debate to have there. There's a further policy discussion. But I think, you know, my goal, we didn't get this done last year because of COVID, so we're already a year behind. My goal is to do whatever we can as fast as possible to get hopefully millions of dollars every year into homeowners' hands to buy heat pumps and electric water heaters and things like that.
We have a couple questions that relate to general resilience, and it might be something that perhaps Representative Amabile has thoughts on, as well as our other two guests. This person wanted to know about governance models and distributed systems that communities could possibly adopt that might incorporate agriculture. That's one aspect. And the other idea is the concept of striving for zero waste being a quick and easy way to fight climate change. I think that is probably not what they meant as quick and easy, but is an important thing to consider. And so just wonder if you have any comments about some other aspects of resilience that might relate to how our systems are set up.
Well, I'll just be very brief because I'm not as knowledgeable as Steve and Edie about the legislation and all of that. But first, I want to make a comment about people wanting their gas stoves. And that is true. And I have a gas stove and I like it. But people also used to like to burn wood in their fireplace. And nobody likes to do that anymore because it's super polluting, because it's a pain in the neck. And so we can adjust. But I do think you have to give people space to adjust. And that resiliency is enhanced when you bring people along by making it good for them, rather than to make it feel like it's punishment for them or it hurts them. So I totally agree with Steve that these are gradual processes. And when I think about resiliency, it's about what are we doing right now to make sure that the climate crisis, which is upon us, doesn't defeat us. So we really have to turn some attention to the forest fires, to the flooding, to the drought, and all those things, and figure out, we have to tackle water in our state because these things are already here, and we've got to make sure that we address them in a way that's proactive. So take it away, Steve.
We haven't talked about fracking today. And is there any, what do you three have to say about stopping fracking?
So I guess I'll say a few things. I mean, obviously we passed Senate Bill 181. I think it was said in the intro, it was the biggest reforms to oil and gas in 60 years. It was also kind of like the only reform in oil and gas in 60 years. There are obviously some things, but it largely is the only big movement forward that we've made on regulating and reforming the oil and gas industry in Colorado. So there, you know, I think we often actually do forget how much that bill did tackle because it did so much all at once. It was just about every other oil and gas bill introduced in one way or another, wrapped up into one bill. It obviously didn't end fracking. It didn't do everything that folks would want is fast enough. But I would say the vast majority of what it was intended to do is happening or is in process. The Oil and Gas Commission has been overhauled, and they're still in the middle of some of their rulemakings, but a lot of the rulemakings are either been completed or near completion. And it's sort of hard right now. Obviously, there's a lot of pressures on the oil and gas industry that has changed sort of what it looks like. In some ways, it's one of those areas where mergers and acquisitions normally isn't something I cheerlead. But it does seem like we are, in the next couple of years, we're going to basically have a couple of frackers, of oil and gas extractors. Most of the small companies are sort of merging or getting bought up by the big guys. Even the big guys in Colorado have been bought up by the big international guys. And I'm not saying that's inherently good or that's going to solve our problem, but I do think it's going. I think the Wild West days of Colorado fracking are going to be over, if not yet, but they will be very, very soon. And I think that actually is probably means that it's going to be easier for us to get the handle on where regulations are lax, where they need to be upgraded, and set standards that large corporations can meet. So I guess what I'm saying is, did 181, and are there bills in process that is going to totally end oil and gas extraction once and for all in Colorado? No. That frankly wasn't the intention of what 181 was supposed to accomplish. I think there will be further fights, further conversations, further debates around the future of oil and gas. I think, as many people have said in the chat, the problem is not just making sure we stop using natural gas. It's the fact that there's a market for it outside of the border of our state. And so, in some ways, that's going to only change when Congress and the federal government does more and takes it on more. And I'm hopeful that we will very soon. But that's part of it. We have to address the demand that is outside of our borders. The companies have not been drilling much lately because they can't sell it. And that's largely because of the international economic conditions and things happening in the Middle East, et cetera. But, it's almost like to end fracking, we need to recreate that market system. But because of national policies that have been passed to make it the case. So that's obviously not all of it. There's more we need to do to protect communities, protect air quality. There's a whole lot more investment we need to do in protecting people from the harmful air impacts of oil and gas. And we got started on some of that last year, but there's a whole lot more to do. And I know there's a lot of people on this call that are more experts than I am on that topic.
Edie?
Okay,
want
let's see
any?
how we're doing here. Can you hear me now? All right, good. So apparently I just need to periodically log out and log back in. What I'd like to do is just sort of finish my thoughts around electrifying the building and transportation sectors, which I think is critically important. I mean, everything that we can do, all of it comes together to reduce carbon in our atmosphere. But I would like to just emphasize that if we're not decarbonizing the electric grid that feeds building electrification and feeds electrifying transportation, then we're really not making a lot of progress. And so that is something I just want to emphasize. And that is really the tail that's wagging the dog, is efforts to, nibble around. And gosh, this is not any kind of criticism towards Steve or anyone who is, working hard to encourage electrification of other sectors. But the source, we're talking about electricity. And if we're not decarbonizing electricity quickly, how much progress are we actually going to make through building electrification and transportation electrification? I just wanted to raise that.
Oh, Steve, you're on.
Yes, I have a question here that asked the question, will the building electrification and EV bills require utilities to stop dumping surplus wind and solar by supporting time of renewable programs? Excel tosses, curtails wind that we pay for. Excel expects $39 million of waste curtailed wind in 2021.
So the electrification bill is not going to address that issue in particular, but there will be other bills that I think get at it in one way. And so, for instance, if there's more, if we have a regional transmission organization, if we move forward in that way, I think that actually does help quite a bit, because if there's another more options of where to send that energy, hopefully it won't go to waste. The other thing is, there needs to be a much bigger investment in storage. That has to be part of the equation. I think I was just reading, there are some questions around, can we even handle 100% renewables? The answer is absolutely yes, if we are smart about it and we think about when and how we can do storage and when we can do demand response programs, where, like I was saying at the beginning of the talk, the utility can sort of control when you discharge your battery and when you charge your battery based on excess, energy on the grid. So there's a lot we can do. Some states are already doing a lot of this. The problem is, and this really isn't a dig at Excel or the other utilities, it's not necessarily in their interest to do so, right? Their interests are stakeholders and building things and selling us energy, not necessarily helping us manage our energy use within our own homes. And so I think we need to figure out from a policy perspective how we make it more in the utilities' interest to explore more electrification, to explore more demand response, to want everybody to get batteries, because in the end, it does provide a service to the electricity grid. And once we have a more complex grid in that way, then energy won't be going to use. And then we won't have surplus solar in the day that we don't know what to do with, because people don't use most of their energy until their evenings when they come home. So it seems crazy that we're still having this problem in this day and age with how much technology runs everything in the world in our lives. The technology is there. We just need to figure out a market incentive or a policy that deploys it soon so that it can be put to use in our grid.
what about a bill to end coal-fired power by 2025, which this person had heard was possibly being considered. And in conjunction with that, can that be done with a just transition? And leading on to, added onto that, what does a fair and just transition mean to you? So anybody could take that.
Well, and Steve, we can just speak in concert. I mean, actually, can you hear me? How is my audio?
It's good right now.
Okay, yeah, well, let's see how far that goes. So with respect to just transition, of course, that's extremely important. The energy sector in Colorado has employed thousands of Coloradans. And so the transition to renewables is a real thing. And the governor established an office for just transition, for the employees in the extractive energy industry. And but it hasn't been funded. And so we're actually looking at several ways that we might be able to fund that office. One of them, and I don't know the details, it's a little bit obscure. Steve, maybe you know a little bit more about this, but Pinnacle Assurance, we are negotiating out of Pinnacle Assurance, and it will be a net benefit financially for us. And so there is a consideration of creating a trust fund in the Office of Just Transition using those proceeds from the transition away from Pinnacle. And there is another idea that I have, and I haven't advanced it too far, but I think, we all know that the extractive industries receive some pretty generous tax credits from the state of Colorado. And even if we just took 0.5% of those tax credits or whatever percent and use those savings to fund the just transition, we would probably have a lot of funding for a robust program. And what was the second part of the question? For the first part?
The other part was in support of shutting down coal plants faster, and can that be done in a fair and in a just way?
Well, the utilities that own the coal plants negotiate with Xcel Energy, with the PUC on when they're going to decommission their plants. We do have targets through House Bill 1261, and the first target is in 2025. So there is consideration of running legislation. I don't know if it's going to happen this year, not because of will, but because of capacity. A bill that would require that the reissuance of permits that keep coal plants operating would not exceed the goals that have already been set for 2025. So we're in discussion. I've been talking to people about that. I don't know if that's something that we can run this year, but I think that would be an extra incentive, and it's absolutely legitimate if we're going to meet that 2025 target, that first target. Then there's no reason to issue permits that would extend, like if a permit is renewed 3 years from now, that extends for 10 years, then that could be construed as a takings, right? So we need to be very thoughtful about how we reissue permits and make sure that they coincide with the goals that were set out in House Bill 1261. Steve?
I'd like to make a comment on this one. You asked, what do you think a just transition really means? And yes, we have to fund the Office of Just Transition, but that was pretty narrowly focused on coal and on, sort of retraining. But really the just transition piece has to be embedded in everything we do going forward, because we have communities all over Colorado that have been the victims of this boom and bust cycle of the extraction industries. And those communities are devastated by the bust cycles because they build up during the boom cycles. And the people in those communities are left broken, broke, lonely, filled with despair. Those are the people who are committing suicide in record numbers. And so it really has to be a bigger conversation about how do we bring economic diversity to the whole state. So especially in the rural parts of the state. And I represent a larger community than just Boulder. I go all the way up to Jackson, where they're heavily reliant on fracking and oil and gas. And that has to stop, and they know it, but they're desperate. And the fastest way to bring people along and to make the transition just and fast is to bring alternative economic opportunity to those places. And I don't think we're really looking at it quite in the right way yet. It's got to be a pretty broad look. And one of the things that brings economic opportunity to communities is a community college, for one thing. I mean, there's just one example. So in Grand County, they wanted a community college and they couldn't make it happen. But that would have brought a whole lot of economic development just in and of itself. And then that economic development would have brought more economic development, and that would have been a really good thing. So that's the kind of big picture thinking I think we have to do. And then I would just say about the workers' comp and Pinnacle Assurance. I would say there's some fairly large pitfalls in that one. And I just so happen to have met with workers' comp today, and they were not excited about Pinnacle's offer. And so I think I'm getting a real hit of how complicated it all is and how interconnected everything is. But I'm not sure that's gonna be the magic bullet. Maybe it will be, but I don't know.
Thank you both. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just say Judy's spot on a lot of that. I mean, I think it's really, it seems like they're like, what the hell is going on? Why aren't we just moving faster? If you look at it strictly as, well, this shutting down this coal plant would mean 120 people no longer have a job. That problem in and of itself, I don't want to minimize it in the work that those workers do. But if that was the policy problem, there are solutions there. But it's much bigger and broader, and it's about the worth of a community and its soul and sort of what it's been doing for generations. And when you take a big asset like a coal plant, and you can replace that with another example. If you take it offline, all of a sudden there's no tax base. And some communities are entirely reliant, like their county government budget is entirely reliant on the taxes that come in from oil and gas or from a coal plant or a coal mine. And that's not a reason to just do it forever, but it means that it can't just be about retraining 100 workers. It has to be about figuring out how to make that community a little bit more whole than just simply, giving 100 people a job. And that's complex and that's big, and that's what just transition has to be about. That's where equity comes in, and we can't ignore it. We also can't use that as a crutch and a reason to not do something. And if anything, it's like it creates a big opportunity for some of these communities. And for us as policymakers to think about how to direct resources and assistance to them so that they can recreate themselves on their own terms.
So we're on the hour. Legislators, do we have time for one more?
Sure.
One more. Steve, you're up.
Yes, I'm going to paraphrase this question. It's directed to Senator Fenberg, and to the sense of it is that Boulder County might pass a fracking ban, but I'm in Erie and split counties, and we have more fracking coming. So how can we get cities and counties to pass these things if we are still fracking, which 85% is shipped out of state?
Is that question about the natural gas, like natural gas going to homes ban, or like a fracking extraction ban?
I would assume that it's the fracking ban on fracking within counties.
So 181, it was not perfect by any means, but what it attempted to do was to set a new floor of basic standards. So where there was going to continue to be fracking, that there would be new standards, and not every permit would get approved, and there would be, and we just recently the commission adopted setbacks. They're not hard set in stone setbacks, but it's major progress, and I think it's 2,000 feet. And so, you know, the first step was to say, if there's going to be fracking in some places. Like, it's not like everybody's going to be like Boulder, like this, whoever asked this question lives in Erie. It's a little different. And so it's not going to not every city is just going to say no, or to put their own regulations in place right away. So that's why we wrote 181 to at least have those baseline standards. If you live in Weld County, and your county and your community supports the oil and gas industry as an economic development, you know, part of your strategy, that doesn't mean you should suffer because of simply you live down the street and you're in Weld County. You should still have basic human rights and make sure that you're not being, you know, used as a sacrifice zone. And that's what the 181 baseline standards are meant to do. But then, as we all know, it also provided a level of local control. So for some communities, you're going to say what the state does isn't good enough. We want to take it into our own hands and have a say over when, where, how, and if oil and gas extraction is going to happen in our backyards. And so that's what we were trying to do with 181, was to sort of create some guardrails to say, you know, communities have the final say now. And for communities to say, yes, let's do it, it doesn't mean you do whatever the hell you want and poison people or don't have safety standards. It means that those communities now have to follow in more stringent state regulations. So does that mean that basically that means that wherever you live, there should be some baseline standards, and you may even live in a place now where your city or your county government has a whole lot more say over how extraction occurs. It's not perfect. But it is, I think, light years ahead of where we were for a long time and how we treated oil and gas, and basically allowed every permit that came to the commission. And the goal of the commission was to promote the industry rather than regulate it. So I don't know if that totally answers the question. I think it means that there are a lot more tools for communities, and also a lot more avenues for people to voice concerns when especially neighborhood drilling is proposed nearby.
Wonder if Edie or Judy have anything to add, and also if you all would consider one more question.
Yeah, go ahead, Edie.
Well, I really have nothing more to add. I think this conversation has been, you know, really sort of explained the challenges of communities that have been so reliant on one industry. And we're not just talking about the fossil fuel industry. I mean, I lived in Alaska for 10 years. I moved there when the pipeline was just getting under construction, and I left a few years after it was complete. And the way that it impacted communities across the state was tremendous. I mean, we went from a population of over 500,000 people to 250,000 people, and communities that, you know, as Steve so well addressed, and so did Judy, communities that had rec centers built and gymnasiums built and, local arts programs funded. All of that came from these industries. And then, the job was done and they left. And it's pretty devastating. And back then, there were no ways to pick up the pieces. People just left. And but Alaska is a boom and bust cycle economy anyway. Some communities like Colorado are not. And I think it's really commendable that all of us care so much about the impacts on the communities that have been dependent on these kinds of investments that the industries have made. And so I'm just going to identify that. And I think that's why we have an Office of Just Transition, and it's bipartisan and the governor supports it. And the industry is working with us on that. So I just got to say that the renewable energy sector also has a lot of great jobs and great paying jobs. And so I think a bridge can be built there. So I guess that's just what I'm going to add to the conversation.
Did you all feel like you could take another question? Or are you ready to go?
We're politicians.
I can do one more question, and then I gotta do bedtime with the baby.
And you're great politicians, and I don't want to cut in on story time. This is a question that's really complicated and would take forever to answer, but just to bring it up, is there any chance that we can change the way our utilities how our regulated utilities operate? Can we look at different kinds of financing and shifting contracts, converting the PUC possibly to an independent system operator, or breaking up, just changing how our regulation would be working, and looking at as a public utility rather than that is working in the public interest rather than the profit making for stockholders?
We should have quit while we were ahead.
I think I know who asked this question too, and his name rhymes with Steve Pomerantz. So yes, the answer is exactly right. I mean, we have a systems problem when it comes to this issue. It's not just how do we get more solar on people's roofs and how do we buy some batteries. It's a systems problem, and it's one that's been entrenched for hundreds of years essentially. But it's hard to change systems fast, and I think it's a reasonable debate out there on is it faster to change the system entirely or to work within the system to meet our climate goals, and I think very smart people could debate all night about which path is going to be more effective and how are you going to get to the answer faster. But I think it's a legitimate debate to be having. I'm glad we're having that debate. As David said in the chat just now, performance-based rate making is a possible path. I'm guessing that doesn't quench Steve Pomerantz's thirst on this issue, but we do a level of performance-based rate making now, definitely not across the board. But there's a lot of improvements we can make, and I think Steve, your question is the right one to ask. But the deliberations are about sort of like what's going to get us to our goals the fastest. And I'm not necessarily saying I know the answer to it right now.
Well, thank you all for being willing to add extra time in your busy day. And we really appreciate all of your answers and your work and your thought on our behalf.
Thank you, everybody. This was just great.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And I think we all agree, Steve and Judy and I, what an incredible privilege it is to serve this community, and the energy and the intellect and the engagement and the support we get from you all to help us form our policies and within our legislation is, you know, it's an embarrassment of riches. So just thank you so much. And keep reaching out to us. I know you will. And I'll let Steve and Judy say a couple things, but it was a real honor and a pleasure to be here tonight with you.
Yeah, I would just say the same as Edie. It's just great to have the support of so many people. And for myself, I know I have a lot to learn, and I now know who I'm going to learn it from, and that's from you all. And so I'm all ears if you want to contact me with your good ideas, or if you're mad at me, or if you're happy, please reach out. It's my job to talk to you all and to learn from you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks, David. Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, everybody, for putting this together. It's really fun to do a town hall where we can really kind of get into the weeds and not just brush on a handful of topics loosely. The crowd on this Zoom is super impressive. Obviously, tons of experts that we all know that are, you know, that we run into at the grocery store and whatever. And these are our people in our community that know their stuff. I think the other awesome thing is that there actually are, just perusing the participants list, there's a lot of people from the utility sector and from industry that are here that, and I think that says a lot. That means, you know, they're not always going to be excited for all the things we've talked about on this Zoom tonight, but I think it is something to be proud of, and to thank them for their willingness to be here. I know there are folks from Excel and Tri-State and Holy Cross, and yes, Brian, the people should visit the Holy Cross project in Basalt. It's super, super impressive, and a really good example of what the future should look like, and how we treat energy more as a service and less of a commodity. So thank you for everyone who's joined tonight, and for the expertise and the continued conversation.
Thank you so much, you legislators. It's just awesome what you do.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Everybody's so grateful to you, and we're cheering you on and appreciate the incredible hard work you're going to be doing in this crazy session. So thank you. And wonderful answers, really inspiring, because they have such a vision of the future. And for us to have legislators with that kind of vision and that kind of sensitivity is just a huge blessing. Thank you.